before I hand it over to our editors and our hosts this evening. So after the event, or after the main part of the event, you're very welcome to buy books over there. They're just right there, so just come up to us and buy books. There will be a ritual element of the event, and so in case you don't feel like coming up to take part in it, do come up to Alice and Claire afterwards, and you will still get your wee goodies as part of the ritual. So don't feel like you have to take part if you don't feel like it. So thank you so much for coming, and I'm just going to hand it over to Alice and Claire.
Thank you so much, Jess. Thank you all so much for coming and for sitting. There are blankets sporadically placed. I hope you are all warm enough. It's not the sunniest of evenings. We are so happy to be doing this event at Lighthouse and to have Josie and Em with us this evening. This is the kind of event that you can't normally do in a bookshop. If people ask you to bring a trough of soil in, people normally say no thank you. So we're incredibly grateful to Lighthouse for hosting us so beautifully. And we're really, really pleased to be giving another outing to the Modern Craft, which launched this week. I am going to hand over to Claire to tell you a little bit about the book.
Thank you, Alice. And just to echo, thank you very much all for coming. It's really nice to see so many people here. We decided to create this book, The Modern Craft, because Alice and I have been kind of witchy types for a very long time. I think we were both kind of little baby witches in the 90s wearing a lot of purple and watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And we have basically been wondering ever since then, am I doing this right? Is my witchcraft practice the way it should be? Is there anything harmful about it? And when we joined forces to become Toil and Trouble, which is our kind of teaching persona, we started to teach a course called Towards a Responsible Witchcraft, which I know some of you have attended. And we realized that the same question was being asked of us by the people who came along. You know, does my practice look like it should? Am I doing it right? And crucially, are there any books that I can read that have advice on how to have a responsible practice? And we kind of realized that, to our knowledge, there were not. We were coming up a bit short when trying to recommend reading material. And it took us an embarrassingly long time to realize that we were both writers and we could actually just make that book happen if we wanted to. But when we got together and started to think about that, we realized that our scope is a little bit limited to things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and herb gardens and things. And we wanted to bring on board some other people from a variety of diverse backgrounds, from a variety of different types of witchcraft practice, who could write for us about their experiences and about their thoughts on the ethics of a witchcraft practice and what that means. And we gathered 13 contributors who have been incredibly patient and incredibly generous with their words and their time. And after many months and many drafts and many emails, we have finally created this book. And it feels a great privilege to be holding it in my hands. And it also feels a great privilege and a great delight to have two of our contributors with us this evening, who we hope you will enjoy hearing from and help us to welcome. We're going to hear, the format of the evening is going to be, we're going to hear from Em, first of all, who's going to read a little bit from their essay and answer a couple of questions. Then we are going to have our ritual, which Alice just described as a kind of strange alternative Eucharist, in that it involves coming up and receiving something. You will not be required to ingest anything. Indeed, we suggest that you do not ingest anything that's on this bench. But Alice will be our Master of Ceremonies for that part of the evening and will guide you through everything that we would like you to do. It's very gentle, and, you know, if you're not comfortable with it, we're fine for you to just remain seated. Once we've done the ritual, we are going to hear from Josie, who's going to come up and read from her essay and answer some questions. And then at the end, there will be an opportunity for all of you to ask questions if we don't all blow away in the next hour. So we're going to kick off. I think, Alice, you're going to introduce Em. I hand you the book. I'll just vamp for a bit longer while you find the correct page. This is the part where we really regret not putting the contributors' biographies in alphabetical order, as I discovered at our event the other night, desperately scrabbling to find someone's biography. Okay, over to you, Alice. Very slick.
The biographies are in the order in which the essays appear, I should say. We haven't just chucked them in at the end. So one of the things that that we really love in our personal lives and our personal practices, but also in teaching, is the tarot. And a lot of people have had a lot of questions about the tarot and gender and how we might reread the tarot, break apart some of the structures that are superimposed upon it. And Em is going to read from an essay that does exactly that. So I'm delighted to welcome Em. They are a writer based in Edinburgh. They've taught creative writing at Edinburgh Napier University and were poetry editor for Malefaction magazine and have been featured at poetry events around Scotland. Most recently, Em transformed their day job into the Gulls Grocery, a workers' cooperative grocery store and arts space. They can be found at Still Writing on Twitter. So please join me in welcoming Em.
Hello, hello, hello. Thank you so much for having me today. Thank you to Lighthouse Books, and thank you to Claire and Alice and to Josie for being here as well. Yay! I'm just going to read a bit. So my essay is called, I should have maybe said that. It's called "What Are You Fighting? Gender, Witchcraft and the High Priestess from One Non-Binary Witch's Perspective." It goes over quite in detail about just one card in the tarot, but the High Priestess, which is my ultimate favorite card. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I didn't bring my deck because I left it at home, but if you want to have a look, I'm sure someone can pull out some tarot from somewhere today. Because we'll be participating in a ritual today, I thought I would read an extract about ritual and about sort of witchcraft ritual from a queer perspective. Queer negotiation. Being non-binary in witchcraft can be really tricky. In his study of queer witchcraft, Martin LePage proposes queer negotiations. These are compromises queer people need to make in order to participate in witchcraft in general, but particularly in community practice. My negotiation personally is the idea of divine genders. Some of the practices and symbolism of paganism, Wicca and tarot are heteronormative at best and bioessentialist at worst. This is not always or usually from a place of bigotry. It is a product of a society that many of our traditions were built in. Luckily, many queer people and allies have taken what they need and expanded upon it. Of course, I don't want to dismiss divine genders. It is a core part of many people's worship. And it works for lots of queer people too. They find that representing pagan or other deities as feminine and masculine, set in opposition or in harmony with each other, to be a key aspect in their rituals and worship. In Wicca, for example, there are roles in ritual for a high priest and priestess. Traditionally, this is portrayed by a man and a woman, and often they're a heterosexual married couple. But this takes negotiation for me. How can I, someone who does not see themselves in the divine, feel comfortable with the worship of such? I do hear a lot about balance, whether from fellow practitioners or card interpretations, and how balance comes from forces that are at odds, negative and positive, male and female, conscious and subconscious. This world is so often split into twos. To make our practice more open to people like me, it takes an openness to a range of experiences, an understanding that the world does not balance with one of each thing. It is not Noah's Ark and cannot be divided as such. So who are you fighting for? The tarot is a question and answer medium, a call and response. To me, it is a song. As you grow as a reader, each strand of interpretation becomes a chord, becomes rhythm, becomes harmony, and becomes story. However, as a medium for justice, inclusion, and activism, it can feel very small and inadequate. The High Priestess can seem unrelated to justice movements too. She is so internally focused and lacks the action of the magician or the demands of justice. No one card or practice can replace the actions of a protest. For trans people in the UK right now, we need help accessing real things such as healthcare, housing, workers' rights. Mutual aid groups, protests and petitions are vital to change. But this does not mean the tarot and our wider practice has no place in our activism. Tarot is a strong tool for learning and self-reflection. If you think you may be queer or trans, I recommend you speak to the cards about it. There we go. They cannot tell you yes or no, but if you are lucky, you may find exactly what you need to hear. For those of us who have found who we are right now, the cards can be a space to reaffirm our own intuition. As queer and trans people, our internal voice can so easily be drowned out by the world around us. The tarot is a beautiful way to connect with that voice. Trans people so often just want to be seen as they are. In ritual, allow for anyone to take the position they feel most comfortable in. In readings, stress that gender on the card is not a one-to-one mapping onto people in their lives. Getting pronouns right and not asking invasive questions is a basic level of respect that I particularly need. Who am I fighting for? Transition is an act of joy. I am locked in a challenge against massive dominant structures, and so the High Priestess secures me. She holds me in my understanding and encourages me to grow. When I ask if I am trans, she tells me I am worth fighting for. When I feel despair, she lets me know what is next lap at my feet in waves of ocean spray. It is okay to acknowledge what is there, she tells me, but it cannot drown you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Em. I'm going to ask you a few questions, but I think I'll stand up and then you're not just alone up here. So first of all, I wanted to ask you what your response was when we got in touch with you to say, we would like you to maybe write an essay for this book about witchcraft ethics. Were you immediately like, I know exactly what I'm going to write about? Or was the process a bit more complicated than that?
I think it was a bit more complicated. Firstly, I was like, oh, my favorite people are asking me to write something. What's going on? But actually, what was the most complicated thing for me is that when we look at ethics and witchcraft, we're not just looking at one particular issue, and no one person has just one issue that they're really, really into or know a lot about, or one thing that they can represent, you know? I think for me, you know, I was more inclined to write about how witchcraft stuff is really expensive. But I kind of thought about it and I went, well, what's been the most impactful thing right now for me? And that was, you know, finding this card, the High Priestess. Obviously I didn't discover her. That would be wild. But the card being so integral to my journey as a non-binary person, and dealing with that and dealing with gender was really important at the time. So went from there.
I mean, it was amazing to receive your essay because I think we'd hoped we'd get an essay about the tarot, but we, for those of you who aren't aware, we gave a very wide remit and a very small budget in terms of words. Everyone was limited to 3,000 words maximum, and the remit was basically anything to do with witchcraft and ethics that you fancy. And so we'd kind of hoped for a tarot essay, but we were just blown away and really pleasantly surprised by what you chose to focus on.
Thank you.
I'm not suggesting that there is going to be a sequel to this book, but if we were to do a sequel to this book and you were given the opportunity to write an essay about another tarot card, I wonder what the next one would be.
I've definitely been thinking about it already. I think about the Magician all the time because the Magician is like the other side of the High Priestess, right? But also the Magician is so gendered as well, so masculine. And as someone, you know, who does present more masculine, who does like want, you know, enjoy that side of things, talking about that I don't know, I just think it'd be really interesting. I also love the fact that the Magician's seen as this really active person. Like he's like jumping about, he's holding his wand up, and it's, you know, I think to me there's something really comical about that, and I think it's probably got a good sense of humor. I think it would be a less serious essay for sure. I think it'd be a lot more fun.
I mean, I think we would love an essay that roundly takes the mick out of the magician. So we might be writing the sequel to this book while we're standing here.
There we go.
The last question I want to ask you for now is a question that I asked at the Porty Books event that we did on Tuesday, and people gave some quite varied answers. I have been experiencing the same reaction from certain people when I've told them that I have been involved with a book about witchcraft, which is, that's kind of weird. And I'm still trying to figure out how I should respond to people who say to me, that's kind of weird. I wonder how you would respond. I'm collecting answers. Help me out here.
To be honest, I get that's kind of weird quite a lot. I've had some really lovely responses in talking about it, especially like we opened a shop, and all of our regulars, including one that's here today, have been really supportive and nice. But I think when people say that something is kind of weird, I just try and take it as a compliment. I'm just like, yeah, okay, like that's a weird thing. Witchcraft is weird. It's really weird. Like all of us together in this collective space talking about something that can be really internal. That's super weird. The fact that, I came to your Toil and Trouble course and now we're, standing here. Oh no, even before that, I came to a course with you years before that and now we're standing here is super weird. But it's all witchcraft and that's nice,
That's a great answer. I'm taking that. Before you run away, I'm just realising you have an opportunity to speak to the assembled company about your shop. Can you tell us a bit about the Girls' Grocery? I know it's nothing to do with the book, but please can you tell us about the Girls' Grocery?
The Girls' Grocery is a workers' cooperative on Ferry Road, and we believe, the first trans-owned and operated grocery store in the UK, and one of the few in the world, we believe. But it's quite hard to claim that because trans people have had to live in the closet for so very long and go stealth. So we're not actually claiming to be the first. We're just saying that we're out and we're here, and it's a really nice shop. We also have an art space, a sort of pop-up space for anybody to come into. So if you're interested, get in touch and follow us on Instagram.
And you're open every day, right?
Every day apart from Monday, yeah.
Get yourselves along to the Girls' Grocery. Please give Em a huge round of applause. Thank you so much, Em.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to hand back to Alice now, who is, as I mentioned, going to be our Mistress of Ceremonies for the next section of the evening.
Oh, that's probably fine. Can you all hear me? Brilliant. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happens next. And whilst I am doing that, Claire is going to be handing around postcards and pens. You each get a postcard you may have to share and pass along the pens. So when we were asked to do, when we suggested that we might do an event here, one of the things that really drew us to this space was, other than Lighthouse Books being amazing, was the fact we could do something in the garden. So for those of you who are aware, and those of you who aren't, it's coming up to the summer solstice. And we wanted to celebrate that here this evening. And what I hope we've come up with is a ritual that everybody can feel included in, and that everybody can feel can give them something, whether you have a witchcraft practice or not, whether you follow a different religion or no religion or anything else. So what we are going to ask you to do with your postcard is a kind of two-stage process. So the ritual is focused on the sun's light and the ability of the sun to do two things. One is to shed light on things that have been hidden. So for those of you who know the tarot, you will know that the sun is often depicted as he's big in the sky, and underneath him is a little naked baby riding a horse. One of my favorite cards, because nudity in the tarot often means that you cannot hide anything, that you are showing your true self. So the sun sheds light on things, but it also brings the light that helps things grow. So as we come up to the solstice, we're not there yet, the light is still building. We want to invite you to kind of take a minute and listen to the voice inside you and think, is there something you're hoping to grow under the sun's light for the next few months? Is there a project? Is there something you want to work on in your personal life? Is there something that you want to shout about that you don't have the courage to? Is there something that you want to grow in yourself, in your community, in your relationships in the next few months? The second question is, and you don't have to write both, you can do one or the other. Is there anything that you would like the courage to shed light on? Whether it's something you want to, something for you, or something for society, something for the planet, something that you want the sun's light at this solstice time to bring awareness to. So we're going to give you, in a second, a minute just to write that down. And then what you're going to do is come up, because we'd like to make these desires, these intentions, grow. So we're going to offer you a seed that you can pop in this pot, and we're going to be looking after this pot and making sure that it grows and flourishes. Don't worry, we're not just going to chuck it away when this is done. And there's some water which has been sitting out under a full moon, and which has lots of really lovely celebratory herbs that you can water your seed with. And then there's a second part of this ritual that you can do at home on the solstice if you wish, which is the 21st. We're going to give you some incense. We're going to give you a little tree of life. And we're going to give you another seed. And you can take that away and plant it in a pot, in a garden, in a communal space, and watch over it and help it grow. And you can, if you like, we sometimes recommend people do this, fold up the card that you've written your intention on and put it under the plant pot, or bury it next to the seed if that's okay to do. You might just want to cut out the little bit with your writing on it. And so you can take that away and do your own ritual at home if you would like. You absolutely don't have to come up. You can sit this out and just enjoy the kind of shuffle around you. And you can still have a seed and some incense at the end if you'd like. So don't feel you have to get up just now. Claire is going to briefly tell us what the seeds are, because I can't remember. And then I will invite everybody to come up. And once you're all back at your seats, we're going to do a little bit of noise making. Sorry, neighbours, but it is still early, to charge the pot with everybody's communal intentions. So, Claire.
Okay, first of all, I did run out of pens. So if you have not yet written your intention down, can you raise a hand and someone will pass you a pen? Pens can be made communal, hopefully. So the seeds that we are going to put into the trough today are corn flower and corn cockle, not corn crake, because that's a bird. Corn cockle. They are both very bright blue flowers when they come up. So hopefully this will be eventually a trough of beautiful blue blooms. And then the seeds in the little envelopes that I'm going to give you to take away are either you will get calendula or you'll get zinnia, both of which are yellowy, orangey, coloured flowers when they come up, which look like the sun. So we thought that was suitable for the summer solstice. I think I am going to stand at the end of our little makeshift altar and hand out the bits and pieces, and Alice is going to lead us in the rest of things. Yeah.
Absolutely. So once you have written your ritual down, your intention down, sorry, and I know that nobody likes going first, but once you have written it down, if you can pass your pen to anyone who's looking sad and lost, and then make your way up to the front, and we will give you a seed and some water.
Generally, my shadows. That's what I'm here for, the goods. I feel like I have minimal instructions for this time. I only read it like 10 minutes before I got here. Because I got the email. Yeah. Yeah, I smell the food. I do smell the food. The way I'm doing it, for sure. Take that. Yeah. I also have a screen which I do for exam. And then again, so much time on the mail.
Your eyes are listening.
So thank you all very much. I am imagining from the stillness and seatedness that we have everyone who wants to has come up to the front. So that's really lovely. So thank you so much for joining in with this, and hopefully you will plant your seeds at home and keep your intentions close by them. So what we're going to do just before we move on to Josie's reading is we're going to what's called in the trade charge the vessel that we have just put these seeds in. And you can charge something using lots of medium, the moon, smoke, crystals, pebbles, really whatever you like. The easiest thing that we all have this evening, more or less, is our bodies and our voices. So I'm going to ask you to do the most embarrassing and un-British thing, which is make a lot of noise. So I am going to count to 3. And when I count to 3, what I would like is for you to make whatever noise your body feels comfortable making. You can applaud, you can whoop, imagining that you're at a ceilidh, you can stamp your feet, although the grass is going to damp that sound a little bit. And then I will do this, and we can stop. I promise I won't make you do it for very long. But okay, on 3, everybody. Big, deep breath right into the diaphragm. 1, 2, 3. You did that beautifully. Thank you so much. So now we are going to invite Josie up here to read from her essay, and I'm going to just tip this microphone back up here.
Thank you, everybody, for queuing up so beautifully in such a lovely British fashion. We hadn't intended for that to be quite so much like church, but hopefully you found it enjoyable and presumably less potentially triggering than church. I am going to just introduce Josie while she makes her way up here. Josephine Giles is a writer and performer from Orkney living in Leith. Their verse novel Deep Wheel Orcadia was published by Picador in October 2021 and was a Poetry Book Society winter selection. Their poetry collections The Games and Tonguet, I think I pronounced it correctly,
Ever to have done that.
were between them shortlisted for the Ford Prize for Best First Collection, the Saltire Prize and the Edwin Morgan Poetry Award. They have a PhD in creative writing from the University of Stirling. Their show, Drone, debuted in the Made in Scotland showcase at the 2019 Edinburgh Fringe and toured internationally. And their performance, What We Owe, was picked by The Guardian's Best of the Fringe 2013 roundup in the But Is It Art category. And you can find out more at harryjosephine.com. Please give Josie a big round of applause.
I was futzing around in my bag to see if I could find my glasses so that you could see my eyes instead of my sunglasses, but I've left them in the car. So instead, I'm just going to look really cool. Okay. This is an essay. It's about the role of ritual, magic, and spirituality in transition. And it looks... it's kind of a mix of a personal essay and a historical essay about my own use of ritual, how I think about ritual as part of a sort of coven of trans becoming. But what I'm going to read for you now is some of the historical material and looking at the role of trans ritual historically. And I should say then, just as a content note, that this will include some discussion of ritual genital body modification. In a corner of the British Museum are 2 serrated bronze bars, little known and rarely noticed. The bars each end in a hinged hoop and are decorated with the heads of animals and deities. They were found in the Thames in 1840 and are dated to 2nd or 3rd century Roman culture in these islands. Along the flanks are the gods of the planets and the days. Saturn, Apollo, Diana, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, and Venus are recognizable from their marks. The 8th is now worn away, but carries what looks like an agricultural crown for Ceres in the 8th market day. Above and below are stallions and bulls, and on the top, facing out toward the congregation, are Kaibala and Attis. I'm just going to say there's a lot of different pronunciations of Kaibala. I'm going to use Kaibala. It's often anglicised as Cybele, and if I had Greek, I would be able to pronounce it a lot better for you, but I can't. So I'm going to go with Kaibala. The memory of Kaibala, a mother goddess, is often suppressed, but for a few millennia either side of the birth of Christ, she and her consort Attis were worshipped. The tradition began in the lands east of the Mediterranean and was semi-integrated into classical Greek and Roman cultures, from there extending through the Roman Empire as far as Londinium, where this tool was used. Roman historians describe the faith's ecstatic rituals and its priests, the Galli, who wore bright clothes, heavy jewellery and makeup, who bleached and crimped their hair and who were castrated. The bars in the British Museum are castration clamps used in the Londinium temple to initiate Galli. At some point the clamps were deliberately broken and cast into the river. The historian Alfred Francis speculated about a 3rd century raid into the temple of the Magna Mater, devotees of Christ fighting to end the worship of Kaibala and its transgender rituals. In some tellings, Kaibala was the mother of Attis, in others Attis's lover, in others both. In some tellings, Kaibala was also the mother of the dual-sexed Agditis, whose penis and testicles were cut off by displeased gods, the organs then growing a tree that fed a nymph who gave birth to Attis. In other versions, Kaibala was herself Agditis, and in all tellings, when Agditis or Kaibala or both appeared in her full glory to Attis, Attis went mad, self-castrated, died, was resurrected and became eternally devoted to the goddess. This story is the origin of ancient Rome's Day of Blood on March 24th, when, after days of mourning and abstinence, the novitiate priests of Kaibala flogged and castrated themselves in an orgiastic ceremony, throwing blood and body parts onto Kaibala's altar. The next sunrise marked the day of joy and relaxation. May we all have such days. In the classical sources, the Galli are named sometimes as he, sometimes as she, and sometimes as a 3rd sex. They are always feminized and frequently racialized, their skin, clothing, and music marking the tradition's origins east of the empire. This religion, and in particular its castration rituals, was at times tolerated by the Roman state and at times rendered taboo. Castration, embraced by the Galli, was feared by power for its potential. For extended periods, Rome appointed an archigallus to oversee the faith, and some have argued that this overseer was themselves never castrated, a citizen manager of Kaibala's unruly transgender spirituality, a means of restraining mother worship's cuts across Roman authority. The Greek anthology records this prayer, naming here Kaibala as Rhea and her worshipper as a castrated he. The long-haired priest of Rhea, the newly gelded, the dancer from Lydian Tmolus, whose shriek is heard afar, dedicates, now he rests from his frenzy, to the solemn mother who dwells by the banks of Sangarius these tambourines, his scourge armed with bones, these noisy brazen cymbals, and a scented lock of his hair. Should I leave it there? Or should I do some more? Okay, let's go into the 90s then. Let's do the historical 90s bit. The spring 1994 issue of Trans Sisters, the short-lived journal of transsexual feminism that emerged from North American trans women's political movements, contains retellings of the Kaibala myth and history, and also a condensed liturgy for the rites of Kaibala and Attis. There is an account of the ceremony's performance, and many involved in the journal and the ritual are names familiar to the history of 90s transfeminism. Trans Sisters was a key player in the conflicts around Michigan Women's Music Festival, beginning with the exclusion in 1991 of trans woman Nancy Jean Burkholder and leading to the establishment of Camp Trans, which fomented much of the radical thought that shapes trans liberation movements today. Trans Sisters closed in acrimony in the mid-90s, broken by burnout and internal fights and by the strains of the Mitchfest conflict. I'm going to just do a little sidebar here to say that one of the regular contributors to Trans Sisters it might be known to quite a lot of you, Rachel Pollock, is the author of 78 Degrees of Wisdom, which in the 70s and 80s was sometimes referred to as the Tarot Bible and was a very influential text in the Tarot revival in that period. She's also a trans woman, which a lot of people in Tarot didn't know. And she was one of the people who was involved. Also a co-founder of the London trans wing of the Gay Liberation Front. Really interesting person. I love her very much. Where was I? Okay. The struggle spectacularized the trans exclusionary tendency within feminism now taking the world stage, and also shaped opposing camps within the trans community that still persist, such as a putative opposition between trans women who undergo genital surgery and trans women who do not. The revived matron of Kaibala, however, continues, operating physically out of the Catskill Mountains and digitally at Gallae.com. It's Gallae. The new Gallae officiate weddings and memorials, and their temple has operated as a shelter for homeless trans people. This is one telling of trans feminist history and trans women's spirituality in one contemporary settler colonial site. It is a white-dominated telling, shaped also by the class positions of those involved. This was noted at the time. Trans Sisters' riotous zine contemporary, Gender Trash, published in Toronto, ran a 1995 article from Christine Taylor lambasting the white middle-class tendency. While a few people run off and spend $1,000 to lounge around in hot tubs or to protest transsexual inclusion at Mitchfest, the majority of our population is excluded from basic human rights, she wrote, going on to highlight struggles against incarceration, psychiatrization, violence, homelessness, racism, poverty, and AIDS. Similarly, the incorporation of Greco-Roman history into the white supremacist narratives of European empire shapes the Kaibala revival's all too common whiteness. The revival's resistance to patriarchy, Christianity, and imperial faith is constructed by the whiteness of what it resists, bound up with whiteness's constructed claim on North Mediterranean antiquity. The 20th century fascist salute is a reconstruction of the French revolutionary painter David's 18th century reconstruction of a 7th century BCE Roman salute. Such layers of storytelling obscure the racial complexities and diversities of classical North Mediterranean cultures, and also the racialization of the Gallae themselves within the Roman Empire. My own interest in the Gallae is not independent of these troubling affinities and heritages. Broader histories of trans spirituality have always been told. Another writer would consider the 18th century Black Haitian revolutionary leader Romane la Prophetess, whose blending of Catholic and Voodoo practices reached back to the feminized religious figures of West Central Africa. Or Sylvia Rivera's use of holy altars and spiritual weaponry in the 20th century Star House for mostly Latina street queens. Just as there is no universal spirituality, there is no universal transition. Transness is shaped by race, class, geography, history, and all the dynamics of power. Complex stories cannot be recruited for simple stories of transness and magic. We can ask, though, why reaching for the spiritual dimensions of transition, or transition through spirituality, is such a common feature of trans lives and trans cultures, and why twisted threads of spirituality, mutual aid, and revolution run through diverse transfeminist cultures. Morgan M. Page, a trans historian who has documented many of these stories on her podcast, One from the Vaults, suggests that trans revolutionaries' resistance to the state and state medicine is part of what leads us to spirituality. If we depathologize transness, she says, and we demedicalize it, the only explanation we are left with is the spiritual. That's that. Okay. I stay here now, don't I?
If you stay there,
remain
I will
here.
get up as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
Pleasure.
reading that. I have a couple of questions, and then we will turn to audience questions for both and Josie, so get your thinking caps on now. The first question I wanted to ask was, how did you come across Kaibala for the first time?
I don't know. It's one of those things that is just sort of passed down through trans femme culture, that at some point somebody was like, and there were these Roman transgender priests. And at some point you have to kind of do your research and find out what people are actually talking about, and then you look into it and then you realize, oh no, there was a centuries long priesthood run by trans women of a mother goddess across a huge swathe of Mediterranean and European culture that was really actively suppressed and has not been taught for centuries since. So, yeah.
I think one of the things that's really interesting is this idea of kind of the preciousness of object histories of what something found in the Thames that, as you say, doesn't attract a lot of attention and the British Museum can tell us. And in the opening section of your essay, which people will have to buy the book to read, you talk about ritually important objects to you. And I wanted to ask about ritual objects in your practice and what your relationship to those might be.
Yeah. I'm kind of annoyed with the British Museum for not making more of this object. It's really, it's well displayed, but it is just referred to as a ritual clamp. And like, you look at it and you're like, oh no, I know what that was for. I know exactly what that was for. And there was a significant piece of historical work done on it in the late 19th, early 20th century, which is referenced in this book. And we just know so much from the historical sources. None of what I'm saying is reconstruction, and it's barely a stretch to say this was a centuries-long trans women priesthood. So at some point, the British Museum needs to work on that. But as for my own ritual, I think, ritual objects is probably, I think for me, magic, spirituality, witchcraft is very invested in the object and the word. Those are my two things that I work with. And it's something, I suppose, that's central to my sense of spirituality, is trying to invest, I suppose, all objects and all things with intention, consciousness, meaning, power, to be in relation to the supposedly sentient and the supposedly non-sentient in a kind of equal way, to try and hold that kind of respect for all the objects that are around me. And in that process of dialogue, objects come into my life where I'm having a conversation with them, and it's significant, and so I ask them to hang around on my altar for a long time. And they stay usually for a couple of years, and then something else comes in and it moves around. Yeah.
I think that one of the ways that we can have relationships with magical objects is through kind of handling and repeated use and repeated dialogue, as you say. And I wanted to ask a little bit before we open to audience questions about the word element of that, because you are obviously also a poet. And I wanted to ask the very small and easy question of how you see the relationship between poems and spells.
As I recall, Iona Lee's essay in the book really goes into that.
It
so
does.
I'm not gonna tread too much on Iona's turf. And I think Iona talks about the etymological connection of glamour and grammar, which are essentially the same word, right? They both come from the same source. Glamour meaning originally not this, which I grant you is very glamorous, but magic. I think all the spell is putting words in an order that makes a turn in the world. The idea of a spell is, if you put these words and you say them in the right way and they're collected together in the right way, then by themselves they change something in the world. And I just think that's what a poem is as well. Like, to me, there's no difference between a poem and a spell. Like, they're very obviously trying to do the same thing when they're done well. So that's all it is, really. Is that's why the words matter.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite back onto the stage, and I am going to open up to the audience. You can shout your question, or I can try and rove to you depending on our distance from each other. Does anyone have any questions for Claire, myself, Josie, or Em? Even if it's about the seed or anything else, technical. Yes.
Thanks. I just want to say personally how inspiring it is to see someone who is non-binary out there actively practicing, assumedly, coming from someone who is non-binary. And I was wondering if you just had any advice for someone who is non-binary and brought up in an albeit pagan but heteronormative and mainly cisgender household, but if you had any advice.
Thank you so much for that. I'm not sure how much advice I can give because my practice has been so internal and not communal because I felt that I wasn't welcome in those spaces. I will say that both Claire and Alice have done a really good job with Toil and Trouble in creating an inclusive space, but obviously these things are not accessible to everybody all the time. I would say for me it was really important to find people in the community that would affirm who I am in a way that was respectful and used ritual sort of kindly, with kindness, I think. But again, it can be really difficult. So I think the journey is to find the people around you that will help with that, and barring that, having your own practice that you can rely on is really, really helpful. Yeah, but thank you for your question.
Absolutely. Also as a non-binary person, that like, I don't know. My practice has mostly been quite solitary and mostly been really as a hedge witch. Like I don't have much truck with a lot of schools of magic for precisely the same reason, and it's mostly because like their gender magic is crap. Like, and I think starting from the position of just being like, they don't know shit. Like they just don't know shit about gender, and I have no interest in doing gender-based magic with people who don't know shit about gender. So like, just ignore them. But then also seeking out ancestors where you might not expect them. So I mentioned Rachel Pollock earlier. I don't know that Rachel Pollock uses the word non-binary to describe herself, but she has certainly written a non-binary perspective on magic transformation ritual. I really recommend a very small collection of hers that came out from Pluto Press a couple of years ago called The Beatrix Gates, which has a short story about transition and magic and ritual that is exceedingly non-binary. And so for me, like finding people like that and understanding, oh wait, we were always in the witchcraft tradition. And when you read 78 Degrees of Wisdom, Rachel Pollock's writing on gender in the tarot is better than most of the supposed sort of queer tarot books that you can get now. It's richer and it's deeper, and it engages with very, very deep histories of magic and meaning, and comes from a perspective that most people are denied because they haven't had the guts to transition. So find there, and we were talking about Pamela Coleman Smith earlier, who single-handedly invented a huge amount of the tarot tradition. Also, absolutely a queer woman. Like, don't talk to me about historical evidence. She left all of her worldly possessions to her friend who lived with her. Like, come on. Unfortunately, all of her worldly possessions at that point were debts, but never mind.
So to thirdly jump in as the third non-binary magic practitioner on the stage, sorry Claire, the other thing that I would say is if you are attracted to deity worship, which I know not everybody is and not everybody finds that an important part of their practice, it can be really, really helpful to, where it is kind of culturally kind of okay, to look at shape-shifting, gender-shifting, non-binary gods and goddesses, of which there are far more than people would like to tell you, and also people whose gods and goddesses or deities whose transition states might not be between masculine and feminine coded states, but might be between a human form and an animal form, a human form and a rock. Yes, my favorite transition state between this body and a small heap. So looking at transition in terms of movement and non-binary identity in terms of what is between states in a much more expanded way has really helped me move away from those kind of really rigid. When I first started practicing magic, I was like, oh no, I don't think I'm a mother, a maiden, or a crone. What do I do? It turns out that anything you want is the answer. So there we are.
Yeah, never mind about Loki being trans. Everyone knows that. Odin is trans.
Correct.
That's the
Yes.
really cool bit.
And if you read A.W. Earl's essay in this book, there's a lot of Odin is trans chat. So get involved. Anyone else got any questions? Yes.
Yeah, so also non-binary witch here. I found that I do tarot readings for the community, and one of the things that I found is that a lot of the time when I offer queer-based tarot readings, people say, "Oh, thank goodness, I feel like I can finally actually get some help here because I don't feel comfortable sharing with a person who isn't queer," right? And I guess I was just wondering if, as queer witches, you believe there's a way to make impact outside of the queer community to make it more queer inclusive, because I found that it is quite queer exclusionary in the circles that I have, tried to sort of break into, and then got, nothing.
I just feel like I'm too short. I got it. Thank you. Yeah, that's a really great question, and I do talk a little bit. I don't really read for others, but I do talk a little bit about it in the book, and my reading on it, and coming from sort of an academic background, it's my readings on it have been primarily studies of queer communities in witchcraft versus studies of queer people in the wider witchcraft community. And I think that that's a really important distinction to make, because you'll often find that queer people in the wider witchcraft community, how do I put this, are not as included as would be nice. It is uncomfortable, yeah.
To be a queer witch in a non-queer witchcraft community.
Yeah.
And the struggle is finding ways to change that. And I just wondered if any of you have experienced that.
I do think, for me personally, and I think if you're comfortable with it, going into these spaces and being open with who you are is one way to sort of, I always think of myself as sort of stomping my way in, I am the wedge going in, and I think that I get a lot of that. I've not always been brave with this stuff. I've not, and I think for a lot of people, it's not easy to do, and it's not always been easy for me to come out and be like, hey, non-binary trans witch, I feel like I'm rambling now, but my advice in general, if you walk in as who you are and they don't accept it, they're probably not a community that you want to be in anyway. But the community as a whole has a lot of work to do and should probably read the book.
I've not tried at all to do anything to change witchcraft community. It's not work that I've done. I have done a decade of work on diversity in the arts, and I'm done. So at the beginning of the year, I made a promise to myself that I was quitting diversity work for at least a year, but in reality it should be another decade, actually, at least. And by that I mean doing like continual advocacy, both for my own forms of marginalisation and for other people's forms of marginalisation. And the reason I had to stop is because it's exhausting. It's so tiring, and if you do it, you will always be disappointed with how little institutions change. And you will always have to settle for much less than you wanted to settle for. And you will always be spending energy on it, and you have to draw that energy from somewhere else. And we're not obliged, we're not obliged to force communities that don't serve us to serve us. And we're not obliged to teach them. We can instead build separate communities and wait for them to catch up. And we will have fewer resources when we do that, and we'll always miss the resources that they have, and we'll always miss the sort of unspoken connection that they have with each other. And that sucks. But if it gives you energy, then it's better. And I'm not saying don't do diversity work. What I'm saying is, if you're going to do it in witchcraft, then be really careful with yourself and really look after your energies, and don't feel like you have to do it, and remember to draw your energy from somewhere to do that work, because it is a hard work. Yeah.
I would say that I would echo everything that Em and Josie have said, and I would say that I have a lot of privilege. I am very, like, my first book came out and I was accepted into witchcraft circles, apart from by some great Amazon reviews, which include the phrase, "her hard left views were off-putting." And I extremely pruned those back for that book. So my strategy, which is not for everybody and which I'm lucky to be able to do, is get invited, turn up and make a big white lady fuss, because I am in a position where I'm able to, but not everyone has to. It's not everyone's job. It is often safer and better to put your own communities in place first. And I'm really lucky with the witchcraft communities that I'm in. I wouldn't be in them if they weren't supportive. But making sure that your life mask is not only attached, but like comfortable, delicious, a delight, something that keeps you going, because the other bit of making a fuss is not fun and not pleasant, and you don't make friends. But that doesn't matter, because it's not the work that is about friend making. But make sure you've got the other bit first, would be my advice. Claire, could you time check for us? No. Could anyone tell us the time? 35. In which case we are drawn, as the night draws in, or at least the cold draws in, so we draw to a close. You have been so wonderful. Thank you for coming along and being vulnerable and standing up and planting your wishes and trusting us with them. And please join me in saying a huge thank you to Josie and Em. Thank you so much. There is now a book table to buy books if you wish.